Good afternoon. My name is Butch Bateman. Today is August the 25th, 2011. I'm a member of the Board of Directors of the Heritage Museum of Montgomery County. Today is our 40th day of triple-digit heat. We're breaking records. We're in an extreme drought with water and a lack of rain. Today we have the pleasure of interviewing Mr. R.A. Mickey Deison, who's joining us today from his law office. Mr. Deison, welcome.
Good to see you, sir.
Thank you, thank you.
I'm glad to be here.
And we're glad to be here also, in air-conditioned office. Tell us, where were you born? How did you get to Conroe? Talk about your family a little bit.
All right. My dad and mother met, are both from Austin, Texas, and they met while they were students at the University of Texas. And they married while he was still a student at the University of Texas. And later he went on to the Austin Theological Seminary and graduated as a minister and became a minister in the Presbyterian Church. And I was the second of what turned out to be 7 children. I have one older sister, and then there are a total of 4 girls and 3 boys in the family. My dad's first assignment after he left or graduated at the Austin Theological Seminary was at the First Presbyterian Church in Houston. And he was an associate minister at that church. And one of the assignments that he had was to come once a month to Old Waverly to preach at the Old Waverly Presbyterian Church that had been formed back in the 1850s. And in order to get to Old Waverly, you had to come through Conroe, Texas. And at that time, Conroe did not have a Presbyterian church.
Okay.
So in working with the presbytery, which is sort of the governing body of a Presbyterian church, they decided to see if they could get a group of people in Conroe to form a Presbyterian church. And that happened in 1939. And a group did get together and form that church. They met at the old high school at that time, Davy Crockett High School, which is now a junior high, or I believe it's a junior high school at the current time. And at some point decided to build a sanctuary. And they acquired property in the 1100 block of North San Jacinto here, just 8 blocks north of where this law office is located today, and began the construction of that church. And so my first contact with the church was during that construction period. And my dad would bring me up, I'd ride with him up to Conroe and walk through the construction, the scaffolding and structure as it was being made there. And ultimately, of course, the church building was completed, and it remained as a Presbyterian church until it ultimately moved out on the loop about 7 or 8 years ago.
Right.
And is now occupied by the Vineyard Church. But we lived, so we moved here, or were active here beginning in 1939. I was 6 years old at the time, and but shortly thereafter that, my dad took a church in Dallas, Texas, and the Westminster Presbyterian Church in Dallas, and so we moved to Dallas, and were up there about 4 years, and right after the Second World War, the minister at the Presbyterian Church, a gentleman named Jim Moore, decided to leave the pastorate here, and the church called my dad to be the minister, and he came here in 1947, and we actually moved here and back in here in 1948, and have resided here ever since. And so the old church manse was located down at 1126 North San Jacinto.
Right.
And there were, of course, 7 children in the family. So the church had to add another bedroom onto the manse in order to accommodate the size of the minister's family.
Was the parsonage next to the church?
It was next door to the church.
Okay.
And Pete was the youngest, right?
Sir,
Pete was the youngest.
Pete was the youngest,
Okay.
and so the older sister, I have a sister Diane, who's she and I went to Austin College together later, and her husband was an attorney in Odessa, Texas, and he passed away a couple of years ago. The next sister, Betty, she married a gentleman from LaGrange, Texas, who was in the oil selling business. And then Becky was the third sister. She married a fellow from Crane, Texas, who was in the pipeline business out there. The youngest girl, Patsy, she married she also went to Austin College, and she married a young man who ultimately became a Presbyterian minister, and is recently retired as a Presbyterian minister. He lives out in Winkler County,
Okay.
here in Texas. Then came David, my brother Dave, and he is a CPA and investor in Weatherford, Texas, and was a mayor in Weatherford, Texas
Okay.
also, and very active up in that area. And then the youngest one was Pete. And Pete, as you know, ultimately became a Presbyterian minister, and he currently is an associate minister at the Park Cities Church in Dallas. So that's sort of all of my family connections, you know, and not any of them remained in the Conroe area except myself.
Right.
And one of the tragedies that the family experienced was that my youngest sister, Becky, graduated at North Texas in Denton, and Mom and Dad went up to the graduation ceremonies and were bringing her back home in January, coming down Old Highway 75 just north of Fairfield, Texas. And there was a grain truck that stalled in the middle of the road, didn't have any lights on it, and they ran under that grain truck, and it killed my father and seriously injured my mother and sister. And that, of course, had a tremendous impact on the
Sure.
family as well as the community.
How old was he, Mickey?
And he was 51 years old at the time he passed away. And at the funeral service for him, because he was a well-liked minister here in town, was conducted at the Presbyterian Church. I mean, it was broadcast by radio to the Baptist and the Methodist churches, and ultimately he was buried then after the funeral service in the family cemetery in Austin, Texas, where all of our forebears lived at that point. And of course, my mother recovered from the accident as well as my sister, and she went back to school. She lacked a little bit to get her teacher's certificate, and she went back to school at Sam Houston and got her teaching certificate and became a teacher here in the Conroe Independent School District system. Taught the first grade, I believe, for a number of years until she retired and ultimately passed away at the age of 92. So,
Interesting.
so all of my family members are all still alive.
Still alive. Good.
And doing well. They're healthy and hale. We have 22 grandchildren in the family, and I think there's now about 15 great grandchildren.
And you know all their names.
And of course I do.
Mickey, is you're with such a diverse and large family, what were your first memories in '39 and when you came back in '47 of Conroe?
Well, of course, at 6 years old, you don't have a lot
Right.
of memories about it. My principal memories were just coming with my dad and watching the construction of the church. That got my attention, and I loved to come and walk through that. And have time
Did
to.
the town stop right there? Was
And
that where
that was the northern boundary
of the town?
of the city at that time.
Okay.
There were a couple of houses on San Jacinto just to the north of the church,
Okay.
where Jimmy Crane lived, was an attorney here, and Ned Wallace, and Bob Shaw, who was the
Western Auto.
had the Western Auto Store, lived just across the street from the church.
Yep.
But essentially, that was the end of town at that point. And
A lot of those were members of the church, weren't of your
yeah,
church?
and
weren't
the Wallace family and the Crane family were members of the
Yeah.
Presbyterian Church. The Shaws were Baptist, and but there were several church members. Dr. Holland also lived right next door to the Cranes, and they were also members of the Presbyterian Church, and with their two children. And so what I remember most was the family attitude. It was that everybody knew everyone.
That's right.
And with that many children in the family, playing with all of the other children, you never knew who was spending the night where. You might look and maybe half the Wallace children were at our house and some of ours were there, or the Cranes, or it was just that kind of no one ever knew about locking a door.
Of course not.
Probably didn't have any locks on the doors, if I recall. And it was just a feeling of belonging, a feeling of security, and it enabled children to grow up with a good feeling about themselves and a desire to improve themselves, and it was just an era, at that time, I believe, that just generated a desire for people to educate themselves and do well.
Yeah.
And
You graduated from high school in what year?
Well, I did not graduate from high school here. What happened was when we moved to Dallas.
Okay.
We lived in Highland Park, as a matter of fact. We were the poorest people in Highland Park. And so I played football at Highland Park, and my claim to fame is that the Walker family were members of our church in Dallas, Doak Walker, who later became an outstanding football star, and they were football players with Bobby Lane at Highland Park High. Okay. I was playing on the B team, and as a freshman up there, and I remember Doak coming over to the coach one day and saying, "Coach, is this boy going to make a football player?" And the coach said, "I don't believe so." But they were a great family, and we enjoyed that. And then when we moved back here, I had just graduated from high school.
Understand.
And as well as my older sister. So it was Betty and the children down from her that all attended Conroe High or the elementary school.
Again, that was 48?
And that was in 48.
Okay. The street in front of the church and the parsonage, was it paved?
It was all paved at that time. And right. And as a matter of fact, all the streets in the city were basically paved, back at that time. And that was a result of the Conroe oil field being completed and generating revenues, for the area. And my understanding, although I would not remember this directly, was that one of the commissioners, who was the commissioner where Conroe was located, because they had more money then, and with the coming of the Conroe oil field, ended up doing the paving of the streets in the city, even though it was in the city of Conroe.
Right.
That's what I've been told over the years. But the streets were all paved, and but we had many good friends. The family that lived directly across the street from us was the Conroe family.
Right.
And so one of my good friends was Tommy Conroe. And Tommy was ultimately my best man at my wedding, and he and I palled around, and he had an old Ford automobile, and so we got to do a lot of running around, the city and what goes on in this place. We got to know a lot of people. My other good friend was Louis Weisinger, who is Gertie Gertie Spencer's brother.
Right.
And he was known as Bubba.
Bubba.
And Bubba and I went off to Austin College together to get an education and to play football. And neither one of us made the grade. And
And this was
and
Austin.
so, at Austin College.
Austin College.
And so
okay.
when that was in 1948
Okay.
that started. And so that was the year we started to college. And Bubba lasted, I don't remember whether he got all the way through the first year or not. I don't recall. But I did end up staying up there 2 years. And then I transferred to the University of Texas. But in the meantime, before I completed my college education, the Korean conflict came along.
Right.
And thinking that I might get drafted and end up as a foot soldier in the hills of Korea,
Right.
I joined the Navy. And I served my time and got out of the Navy in 1954.
Okay.
And then I went back, and as a matter of fact, I was going to go back to the University of Texas, but I didn't get out until October.
So they didn't send you to
And
Korea?
it was too late. Well, why you went to Korea?
The Navy sent you to
the
Korea?
Navy. I went there, I did.
Okay.
To Japan,
What were you on?
and I was on an LST, as a
Okay.
matter of fact, and I was a navigator on an LST, and I did the star sites and computed and fixed, where the ship was located, and we served. Matter of fact, it was a very interesting time in my life. I did receive one battle star. We participated in the landing to pick up a motor transportation division of the 1st Marine Division when the Chinese came into the Korean conflict, and they came streaming down the hills, and we were under fire there while we were picking up this motor transportation unit, and the ship was damaged at that time, and so we after we left that and delivered that division down to South Korea, we had to put our ship into dry dock in Sasebo, Japan, to have repairs done to it.
Okay.
And then we went from there to serve as a minesweep tender along the coast of North Korea, and a ship that picked up down flyers, and there were several, quite a number of aircraft that were shot down over there, and they generally ditched in the ocean, and we picked up several flyers, who ditched
Right.
out there, and I specifically recall one young flyer who, because the water was extremely cold, and so they, if you were in it for several hours, the likelihood of your survival was pretty remote, and he sprung a leak in his flight suit, and his leg had filled up with water
Oh my gosh.
before we picked him up, but he was so grateful when we found him and picked him up that there were 120 officers and crew members, 6 officers and 114 crew members on the ship. He went around and shook every man's hand on that ship. And I didn't blame him. I understood.
Did you save his leg?
He was able to save his leg also. Yeah. So, and then we also then made the Incheon landing when General MacArthur cut the Korea half in two. And the interesting thing about that landing was that in the Yellow Sea, the tide is about 30 feet.
Okay.
And so when we went in to and delivered the trucks and tanks and things that we were taking in there, the tide went out, and our ship and a number of ships were just sitting in the mud.
Mhm.
These big ships just abandoned. I mean, in the mud, just stuck in the mud, couldn't move, and we had to wait until the tide came back before we could get out of the harbor. But fortunately, the big guns of the I think it was the Wisconsin at that time, and the air strikes did enough damage in Incheon that there was no grouping of the Koreans, to come out and do anything about it. They were pretty weak at that time.
That's the Wisconsin was a battleship.
That's right. The Wisconsin was a battleship.
Which future generations may not know what
Yes,
what a
right.
battleship is. You just have to look it up and
So
see the size of the guns.
So it had
And how-
nine 16-inch guns on it that could fire 22 miles to targets and hit them 2,000-pound shells.
Right.
To give you an idea of the size of the shells that were coming in. So basically, most of the buildings that we saw, a lot of the structures were still standing,
Right.
but the interior there was nothing on the inside. They were
For the
pretty
shells,
well
yeah.
destroyed, at that
So
time.
you were there in
And-
2 years?
And so I was there, actually I spent 3.5 years.
3.5 years in
the
the Korean
Navy.
theater.
And then came back, but I got back in time, not in time to re-enroll in school, because I would have had to do that in September,
What year was that?
and that was in 1954.
Okay.
And so one of my friends was a kid by the name of Carl Quibido, and his sister was Justine Calfee, and we started going together, and she was a student up at Sam Houston, and so her argument was that since I'd been out of school for that number of years, that I probably should come up to Sam Houston and go the spring semester in Sam Houston, and then I could go back to the University of Texas in the fall. Well, the problem was I fell in love, and so I went ahead and stayed with Sam Houston and graduated at Sam Houston, and then I married Justine in December of 1957.
Okay.
And that was shortly after my father had passed away. And
Do you recall
So-
how many students were in Sam Houston and Huntsville, Texas at the time?
I really don't. Maybe
Small.
at that time it was 12 or 1,500 students, probably
Very
something like
small,
that. Yeah,
very
very
small.
small school. And I graduated. I was principally interested in getting a business and accounting degree, and so I graduated with a BBA with a major in accounting and a minor in history. And then I proposed to go directly to Austin to the University of Texas Law School. But my father was killed, and
Right.
unfortunately, and we had the two younger boys were still at home, and so
Your
it
brothers.
was better for me to help my mother and
Right.
to stay here. So what ultimately happened was that there were a number of other boys here that were going to South Texas Law School in Houston. Buddy Hopkins was going at that time. Roy Harris was going down there at that time, and so I enrolled actually in the University of Houston Law School, the Bates College of Law at University of Houston, and went one semester there. And they said, "Look, we're all driving down together. It would be easier if you might as well just shift over and let's just all go together. It would be easier to pool that way." So then after the one semester, then I went over to South Texas Law School, and that's where I graduated at law school. And I started my practice in Houston. At that time, we had one child. We had a daughter, Dana, and we wanted to come back to Conroe and to practice here in Conroe. Because we lived here in Conroe,
Right.
and I commuted down to Houston, and that was on the old highway, and so it would take me like an hour and a half to drive from Conroe into downtown Houston where my law office was. And then when I got there, Houston had this crazy system, or Harris County, this crazy system of how they assigned cases, and there was just a large pool, and so you'd meet your client. So I'd tell them, meet me at Walker and Main, and we'll walk down to the courthouse. And we're scheduled to go to trial at 9 o'clock. We'd get down there, but we might be 410, and only 200 cases would go to trial that week. So you were just out. So you spent your time to go down. And I told my wife one day, I said, if I keep this up, I won't live to be 40 years old. And I said, I don't know whether I can make a living practicing law in Conroe or not, but let's give it a try. And she said, if that's what you want to do, I'm for you. And so I moved my practice up to Conroe, and really I never looked back.
Yeah. What year was this, Mickey?
That was in 1966, I believe it was.
66.
Yeah, 66.
So the time you were going back and forth to Houston, where were y'all living?
Well, we lived in two places. We lived in, the first place was in the garage apartment that the druggist had right up here on, I know his name.
Myron?
Yeah,
Coleman?
Myron Coleman. That was where we started. And then her parents had a garage apartment
Okay.
at their house, and we moved over and lived in that house.
Yeah.
Then we moved to Houston for a short time and lived on a street called Gardendale down there. And then when we came back up here, we bought the house on that Doyle Howe built over on Maple Street
Okay.
in the Oak Hollow subdivision, which we still own over there, and bought that in 1967.
Okay.
And yeah, and
Well, the reason I ask is because I remember my father saying, and other people have said, in early Conroe, there was really no place to live.
well,
Housing
there were no new houses.
no new
at that
houses,
time, yeah.
even rental houses.
And
was
so it was very
difficult.
hard to come by. And so Oak Hollow was one of the earliest
Yeah.
new developments that took place in Conroe. And it was developed by Doyle Howe, as you may recall. And this was the second house that he built there. And he lived down on the corner as you first enter into
Right.
Oak Hollow on Maple Street. And then this one was like the last house on Maple Street down on the west end of the development. So,
You had all your law partners there.
and so at that time,
Dyson, Cruz, and Theo,
I had shortly before that, I had been in law school with a guy named Mathis Kinney.
Yeah.
You remember Mathis, I'm sure. And so Mathis joined me up here,
Oh.
and we opened a law office, and we bought that old building where the prices are now, and remodeled it, and put the new, outside cover on it that has now been taken off, fortunately, but at the time that was sort of the thing that you did. And so we moved into that law office there, and that's where we practiced law. Ultimately, I got involved in one of my very good friends was a gentleman named John Blair who lived in Kuntz, Texas. And at that particular time, John was chairman of the Texas Air Control Board, which has now been merged into the Texas Water Board, which is now called the TCEQ, or TNRCC is what it's called. And he called me one day and he said, you need to go up to Crossett, Arkansas. And I said, why would I want to go to Crossett, Arkansas? And in the meantime, I bought an airplane, and because I'd always been a flyer. And he said, well, the United States government had an antitrust suit against Georgia Pacific, and they spun off 20% of their assets and formed a new company called Louisiana Pacific Corporation.
Yep.
And this gentleman is a friend of mine who was in the timber business, and he's been hired as the vice president of LP, and he wants an office down in this area. And he said, you ought to go up there and talk to him. So I did. I flew up to Crossett and met him. We became good friends because he was also a pilot. And he said, I would like to come to Conroe. He said, we want a Southern Division headquarters there.
Probably.
And he said, but you don't have any office space for us. And he said, I could go to Huntsville. And he said, but the reason I would like to come to Conroe is because of your airport.
Airport, yeah.
And he said, because we anticipate that we're going to, as the company grows, we'll be utilizing some jet aircraft. And I can't utilize jet aircraft in Huntsville. And I said, well, I had no idea I could do this. But I said, well, if we built you an office building, would you come down? I said, I would. And he said, you tell me what you're going to do. And he said, yes, we'll make that decision. So I had another friend in Houston by the name of Harold Coley, who was actually a friend of Mathis Kinney. And Mr. Coley was a a contractor who built office buildings. That's what he did, and he had a number of those in Houston, and he built the same building that's constructed over here is also down on the Southwest Freeway. And I said, you know, this is something that we need fairly soon. And he said, well, if you can get a lease out of a company like Louisiana Pacific, we can build that building.
Yeah, take it to the bank.
So we took it to the bank. So the Madeley's owned that old pasture down there. It was known as the Madeley pasture. You may remember that. And it was owned by the two different families,
right.
A.A. and D.A. Madeley,
right.
you know, and Aunt Sophie, you remember she lived in the old house behind where the Mexican restaurant is now. And so because it was owned by the two families, they said they would sell it, and that way that they could split that out and they would not, you know, be involved with one another again like that. So we bought 20 acres down there from them, and set aside 5.5 acres to build the LP Tower. We got financing from Wachovia out of North Carolina, and got that building built, and put it into a limited partnership where we owned it. And sure enough, they leased the top 3 floors in that building, and we began to lease up the rest of it. And as a matter of fact, I put my law office in, and by that time, we had formed a law firm with David Cruz, you know, in Ritchie Field, and so we officed on the 6th floor of the LP Tower, and we were the only ones up there beside LP, and we were able to find and to lease tenants, you know, to lease up that building, and the little one-story annex,
right.
you know, that we
that
had
must have been
there.
a tremendous boom to Conroe to have an office building and a corporation.
It was, you know,
show their support.
That's right.
For a town like Conroe.
It really was, and the council was very supportive of it. The county government, the chamber. I mean, it was just something that the community
so that
got
building
behind
was,
and really
was finished
supported.
about what time?
In 1974.
74.
And
that was Interstate
occupied.
45 there.
And 45 had been completed, you know, by the time, but it didn't have the feeder strip in there. It just had that old road that existed, you know, down there. And the property, of course, on the north side of it was the old city landfill site. You know, where they used to burn trash, and Sam, you'd remember that as a kid. And none of us know even today, and that's why that site is just still an open area out there, because no one knew what was all underneath it, and no one would ever want to try to put a foundation on that.
So that's north of 45 in Glenstone?
It's just north of the LP Tower.
Oh, north of the LP Tower.
And in front of, and why the
library is.
That's where the library is.
Okay.
But the library sits back behind it,
yep.
because you couldn't build on the old.
Okay. Now I know where you're going.
Burn site.
The closest building to the landfill.
But that's the closest building to the landfill, right?
Well, the landfill was close to the city.
And that's where they used to. And they used to burn there. Principally, it was a lot of it was burned. You could go I remember going by there as a kid and seeing the smoke coming up and looking over and wondering what all that trash was doing, but there it was.
that was quite an accomplishment for you and your partners to somebody like that.
It really was something I was always extremely proud of.
Absolutely.
That I had the opportunity to do that, and had good friends that helped us, you know, get to move along and do that. So we officed over there then until. And then during that period of time, I got interested in the city, and this was actually sort of during that same era. I decided I'd run for mayor in 1971. And one of the big issues at that time was the fact that the city government was basically controlled by the volunteer fire department. And Perrin Cranford was chief of the volunteer fire department, and he was also the mayor.
Yep.
And there were a lot of people who were dissatisfied with those issues. And so I got a lot of support, you know, for that, and I ran and won that election
against Perrin.
Against Perrin.
Perrin.
And even after that, we remained very good friends. It was not a political issue,
Good.
in that sense.
You
And
bought your supplies from him, your office supplies?
bought their office supplies, and ZB she was a little upset about it at first.
I can
But
imagine.
she got over that, and we remained very good friends with the
Excellent.
Cranford family
Excellent.
over the years. And
So now you were mayor at what point?
From 1971 till 1974.
And what happened during those years?
And those were really
You had the
tremendous growth years.
You had the interstate coming.
And the interstate was coming through. The city was growing. The county was growing. We did not have a thoroughfare plan for the city. And so the traffic circulation was very bad in town. And so one of the principal things that we did was to obtain a thoroughfare plan for the city. And as a result of that plan, one of the changes that were made was to make Phillips and Davis one way.
Right.
Davis one way east, Phillips one way west, and to bring them together over on the other side of Fraser Street over there. And that helped eliminate a lot of the problems that we were having with the congestion in the downtown area.
Yep.
I got Tommy Metcalf to serve as a chairman of a bond committee, and we worked out a bond program to improve the utilities and the streets, here in the city. And I learned a bitter lesson about that in this respect, that I think a lot of the people did support that bond issue, but you can't ever pass a bond issue if your council is divided. And we had two council members, Wallace Lampton and Charlie Word, both of whom later moved to Panorama,
Yep.
who opposed that thing. They didn't think we ought to do that. And so as a result of that, the bond issue failed.
Yep.
And had we been able to do that work, pass that bond issue and do the work that we wanted to do at that time, we could have made some improvements that cost substantially less money.
Absolutely.
Than what they ultimately ended up costing, the city at a later time. The other factor that was going on at that time was the creation of Lake Conroe. And one of the issues that the city had was how to secure its long-term water supply. And so as mayor, I negotiated a deal with the San Jacinto River Authority for the city to acquire 10% of the water in Lake Conroe. The city of Houston owned 2/3, 66 and 2/3%. San Jacinto River Authority had a third, and then so we would have gotten 10% of that water for a fee to be paid over a 50-year period of time. And once again, the council was split on that issue because several of the council members said, we have a groundwater supply here that will last forever. We don't need that water. And so that issue failed. And so I ran for a second term unopposed, and that's an easy way to run because you're assured of getting elected. But one of the things that happened in 1974 was so before I finished my term, is that one of the tenants that we had in the LP Tower was an engineering firm from England called Davy Power Gas. And unbeknownst to us, the manager that we had at the building, we didn't realize that there was a clause in that lease that said that if they didn't get the job that they wanted here, they had a right to terminate their lease at the end of 1 year. So they leased the entire second floor, I believe, the entire second floor of that building. They didn't get the job that they wanted, and so they terminated their lease. So we terminated our manager, and I had to, and so I stepped down as the mayor because I was the principal responsible for that building, and we were having to belly up each month and make sure we made those payments, on time. So I went back to my law practice, because had continued my law practice during that time, but also as a building manager, which I really had not intended to do, and so I couldn't do it all.
Right.
And so I left the office early, to go take care of that problem. And ultimately, the good Lord looks after all us fools and idiots in this world. I had a gentleman to come see me one day, and he said, I work for a company that needs some space up here, but I have to have 3 floors. And I said, well, I don't know whether I can get you 3 full floors or not. He said, well, if you can, I can't tell you the name of the company, but I can tell you that there's no other office space up here, and I can tell you that they would enter into at least a 5-year lease. So I did everything I could, and I got 3 floors for them. And then he told me it was Superior Oil Company. And so Superior came up, and they leased 3 floors in that building, and
They were
and filled it up.
They were a major
company.
A major employer here in
major
Conroe.
employer in Conroe. And so then that alleviated that problem.
That financial problem.
That
right.
financial problem. And so I had not planned to go back into politics. But one day I was sitting in my office, and 2 commissioners came to see me, from the 2 county commissioners, and they said, Judge Coker is going to resign, is going to step down. He's past his retirement age, actually, and he's going to step down. And Governor Briscoe is going to appoint Lynn to replace him. And we need a county judge. And I said, well, I don't think I'm too interested in that. I said, I'm doing well in my practice here, and got a number of investments here in the community, and I don't know that I really want to do that. And they said, well, we want you. And I said, well, why do you want me? And he said, well, you were a good mayor. People like you here, and we know you could do us a good job. And so I talked to my family, and had a lot of people then contact me and say and so finally, to make a long story short, I said, okay, I'll do it. And they said, well, you've got to serve out his term, and if you come, you need to stay. And I said, well, I won't do that. I said, I'll tell you what I will do. I'll serve out his term, and I'll run for 1 term, and then I'm gone. And they agreed to that. And so that's what happened. So when Lynn stepped up on the district bench, I was appointed the county judge. I ran 1 time. I had 1 opponent here and won that race. And then I served that time out, and I served from 1977 until 1982. And but I also left office early in that one because I had remarried. I got divorced in 1980.
Okay.
I remarried in 1981, and in 1982 we had a daughter, and she was born handicapped. And we were living over in Montgomery at the time. Had bought a house, so we had one of those historical houses.
Oh my gosh!
We're going to try to refinish all of that. But Montgomery did not have a schooling, to care for children like that. And so we said, well, what we need to do is we need to move back to Conroe, and our duty is to take care of that child and see to her welfare. She's 30 years old now, and still handicapped, does not speak, and so ultimately we came back to Conroe and lived here in Conroe, and I just went back to my private law practice at that time to devote my time to making a good living and taking care of my family.
That's right.
And since that time, then we gave our life over to that little girl until she was about 20 years old, and she lives in Houston now. We bought a house for her, and she has a nanny.
Good.
Taylorwood is her name, Taylorwood Deison, and so Susan and I we take care of her. We get her on alternate weekends and care for her even to this day, and But once that we did that, and my time was freed up, I was reading picked up the census, the 2000 census one day, and started looking at it, and I said, I could not believe that the Conroe that I knew as a boy
Right.
had changed the way that it had from 1990 to the year 2000. And we then had 33 and a third of our population were Hispanics who were uneducated, unfortunately for them, not their fault, low income because they had no education. And I said, something we got to do. Something needs to be done. This is too wonderful a town, and it has such a good heritage. And we had people like Sam and yourself and all of our
his
friends.
mother and my father and
all
your father.
the families,
That's right.
that were here. And I said, we got to do something that, we can't just let this town go to pot, like that.
Right.
And the principal reason that it happened is basically our own fault, because we let all of these undesirable subdivisions around town remain in those conditions. And what happened was the Hispanics come in. They have housing that has water and sewer. They have police protection, fire protection. They got all the benefits of living in a city that they wouldn't have out in the country somewhere.
Right.
They couldn't afford to live in the woodlands because the prices were too high. So they just came in by droves and settled in these substandard areas,
Right.
that we had here in the city, which is, of course, where they still are. So the thought came to me one day, and I always attribute any good thought that I ever had to the Lord. He probably doesn't want to, would never admit that to anybody, but I said, how is the best way what can we do as a community to change the demographics that we have here?
Right.
Because and the downside of it was our demographics. You take any strong retailer like Dillard's or someone like that, take a look at the demographics of our city, and they're not going to locate up here because we don't have the people who earn the kind of money that's necessary to buy their goods and services. So what do? You raise the level of education and job creation. So that's how we got involved in the creation of a business technology park. And we worked on that for 8 years. Had a lot of help from J. Ross Martin and a number of the members of the council, from Tommy Metcalf and Webb Melder. It's been a blessing, in that respect, and the members of the city council who've been very supportive of that idea. And now that it is finally coming into fruition, the Mayor Metcalf appointed me to the Industrial Development Corporation, and then I later became its chairman, and sort of overseeing now the acquisition of that property and the construction of a facility that we hope will create many thousand, 6,000 or 7,000 jobs of job bases that will be in the $75,000 to $250,000 range.
Right. This is the park over by the loop.
And this is over by the loop over there.
Right.
We already have the industrial park, but one of the problems with the industrial park, and we have some good companies that have located out there, but one of the problems with the industrial park is that the bulk of their labor force are in the $30,000 range, and one of the issues about that, once again, the problem that families in that that are in that price or in that salary range, by the time they buy groceries, schooling, the things that do not produce sales tax revenues, because those are all sales tax exempt, they don't have any money left to spend on other matters. With a car, which produces no sales tax. Gasoline doesn't produce any sales tax, and so they have to spend their money to live. Yeah. And the city lives principally on its sales tax revenues, and not so much on its property tax. So so the logic is that we have to have good salaries here, and with people who have money that buy products that produce sales taxes, to us. And so that's sort of the principle and the logic behind what this project is all about. So I'm 80 years old now, and I'm doing the last thing that I plan to do, in public life with this project. And hope to see it get off the ground. And their decision to name it after me is a mistake.
We're gonna have a bar building and a Mickey project. Okay, 2 nicknames.
And anyway, so I'm great. I'm awfully grateful. Clearly, that anyone would consider doing that. But so that's what they're going to do.
But Mickey, how many businesses are out there now? And
well, there's in the industrial park. There's probably 12 or 15, and there's several thousand jobs out there.
Right.
Now the technology park, is not completed.
Right, they're working.
And we won't be having businesses located out there until probably another couple of years before that's ready, for that kind of.
Well, you can tell it's a success by the traffic on 3083 and Loop 336.
Can't you tell it?
Every day between 8 and 5 o'clock.
You can tell it already.
It's absolutely phenomenal, the traffic that those companies are generating.
So one of the other things that I did here was I love to fly. And one of the decisions that I had to make when I graduated from law school that my wife decided for me was whether I would be a commercial pilot and go to work for one of the airlines or practice law. And she made that decision for me.
And we know what the decision was.
We know what the decision was. But I never lost my love for flying. And so I've owned several airplanes over the years. And so when I was the mayor, I did everything I could to Lynn Coker to try to get him to turn that airport over to the city, because I said, y'all won't do anything with it.
That's right. Just sit there.
It's just sitting out there doing nothing.
What was his name? Mr. West used to have a twin-engine.
That's right. So I made an offer to him as the mayor, to do that very thing.
Kids would go out there and walk around the airport, it's wide open.
And he took that to the commissioners, and the commissioners said, well, we don't want to give it up. But what we will do is we'll hire a manager for it for the first time. So the very first professional manager for the airport was hired by the Commissioner's Court during Lynn Coker's time. And then later, when I became the county judge, I had a whole lot more say-so, about that property then. And but I did have the unfortunate problem of commissioners who didn't see the value of it, and so I was pretty limited in the amount of money that I could get to do development work for it during the time I was a county judge. But 2 of the things that I began to work on out there were the 2 drawbacks that we had that I learned from Louisiana Pacific and their Learjet, is that corporations don't like to bring aircraft that are that expensive into uncontrolled airspace.
That's right.
And secondly, the runways are too short.
That's right.
To get a jet off on a hot day like today, the air is real thin. You can't take a full fuel load and get a jet off the ground out there at 6,000 feet. And so, what happens is you can only fill it up partially with fuel. And then you got to stop somewhere to refuel if you're going to the coast, with that airplane. So they go to Portland. So they got to stop in Denver and refuel. Or if you're going east, you got to go to Memphis or someplace like that, and refuel. And so the drawbacks we've had to this airport out here were those 2 principal issues. And so one of the good things that has happened in the last 10 years at least is our commissioners are much better educated, are much more attuned to what are the things that are of value in this county that will be productive, for its development, and they recognize the great asset that airport is. So they've been willing to commit money to that airport to build, to lengthen the runways out to 7,500 feet, and to put in an air control tower. And so just last year, we finally got that air control tower. It's in operation out there now. So we now have controlled airspace, at least up to 10,000 feet, here and out for, I think it's 5 miles is the type of area that we have, here. And and the funding has already been approved by TxDOT for the extension of the runway. We believe that construction will start in next spring, and will be finished in 2013. And then and when that happens, you will not believe what's going to happen to that airport out there, and some of the things that are already being planned, for its development. And that's going to serve as an additional catalyst also for the development of our technology park out there as well.
I know the county commissioners are now talking about extending roads off of 45 into the airport,
and bringing
to give
Lead Line
customers
Road will be part of this bond issue that the county has just announced, and that will access and bring us into a new entrance into the airport out there. And so we're a couple of years out maybe from seeing that completed. It's just going to change what happens in that area out there dramatically. And so one of the things that also happened is I was called up to Commissioner's Court here a couple of months ago, and I thought I was there to talk about another issue out there. And they read a proclamation and said that they were going to name the tower after me.
That's right.
So they now have a ceremony set up for September the 29th to name it the Deison Airport Tower. I guess what they're going to name it, I don't know. But anyway, I'll be there on the 29th, to do that very thing. And of all the things, I couldn't think of anything that honors me more than that, because of the 50 years that I've spent at that airport,
flying in and out
of it, and dreaming about its development and the good things that I know it can do for Conroe in this county.
Well, it's another growth engine, another growth vehicle.
It
will bring jobs.
That's right.
High-paying jobs, repair work for aircraft.
And it'll be a huge benefit, to the people of our city and our county, as far as that goes. So. And then when I'm through
26 miles from Houston Intercontinental.
Yeah. And so we used to come in here at night and shoot our approaches off of that VOR station down at Humble, down there, because we didn't have any instrument landing systems, in here. We had an NDB, they called a non-directional beacon, which doesn't help you a whole lot on a foggy night.
Set out there by the road,
trying to come in, to that airport out there. But we now have, or will have, when this is all completed, instrument approaches on both runways. And the county has also saw to it that when they were redone, that they were concreted. So they're concrete runways. TxDOT only wanted to pave 119 to 75 feet, but the runway was already 100 feet. So the county stepped up and paid the additional cost to pave it out to the 100 feet on each side. On 1432, it's 150 feet. And they only wanted 100 feet, and that's according to their rules and the type of traffic that we have out there. But once again, the county stepped up and paid that cost. And so those runways are fully concreted runways. They're going to last for many years. TxDOT only approved 7,000 feet. It's another 1,000-foot extension. The county stepped up and paid the additional 500 feet to extend it out to 7,500 feet. And so we have a lot of thankful to Barb and to the commissioners for their commitment to the development of that.
At 7,500 feet, Mickey, is there room to expand it, or is there a need to expand it?
We can take it out to 8,000 feet. Yeah, that's all we planned for at this time. Yeah, but the runways at Hobby are 7,600 feet, 7,602 feet, I think, something like that. So these will be almost this runway will be the same length you have down at Hobby. Yeah.
And I've read in the paper the tower's now manned.
Yes, and it's manned from dawn to dusk. It's
Okay.
staying out there, so
Okay.
not at nighttime.
So now, after all these years, you can
Yeah.
finally fly safe.
And finally, fly safe and out of that place.
Tell me something. With everything that you've accomplished and all the thing, everything you've seen in your business and law career, uh, the lake, the airport, the industrial, is anything you've mentioned these things that are dear to your heart? Anything else
Well,
that you?
one of the things that happened too is that I think is also maybe even the greatest benefit that we've ever received in this county is I have a friend in Houston named Jim McAllister, who's in the real estate business. Jim McAllister worked for George Mitchell at one time, and I didn't know Mr. Mitchell except by name, but I went to meet him one time at Jim's insistence, and he told me, and he always talked to me like I was one of his employees, and he just gave me instructions on what I needed to do. You know?
Sometimes that's the best.
And sometimes that was the best thing. But his ideas were always great. And he said, Mickey, I want you to go up there and tell your city council to release all of their ETJ in the Woodlands area because I'm going to bring all of that under the control of the city of Houston. And I said, well, Mr. Mitchell, I know, I understand why you want to do that because you don't want someone to come in and incorporate an area and mess up your development plan, you know, down there. But I said, if I go up there and ask the council to do something like that, I can never run for public office again in Montgomery County. Well, he didn't like that answer, you know, too well, and that ended up in a lawsuit. And out of that lawsuit, it got settled. This little city of Shenandoah was created as a buffer, you know, between the two entities down there. And and then when I became the county judge, my relationship with the Woodlands was more in the line of approving their plats and their road developments and things like that. So a lot of times he'll tell me jokingly, "You made a better judge than you did a mayor." He'll tell me sometimes, but the big advantage that turned out for this county is had that property down there developed just in these little small subdivisions that we've seen, and without the proper thoroughfare planning and control, it would have been a huge mess for this county, and it would never have developed the value that it is down there, you know, at the current time. Yeah. So that turned out to be one of the greatest blessings that ever took place. Mitchell he had a lot of criticism, you know, but he stuck with his plan. Yeah. And that development is a huge benefit to this county. We were experiencing at that time a serious decline in the production at the Conroe Field. And the county had relied so much on the value of the Conroe Field to pay its bills.
That's right.
And this offset that decline. So as the values began to build down there, it offset the decline in the values of the Conroe oil field, and saved the day for Montgomery County. Is really, in fact, what it did.
It brought international corporations to exposure
right. And
here.
the recognition it got as a result of that has been tremendous. So, so I'm always grateful for my association with Mr. Mitchell and what he did down there for this county is just too great for most people to realize.
He's truly a legend because of his vision.
He clearly is, you know.
Yeah. And to create a new city in the woods.
Yeah. So my wife and I, we moved down there and lived down there for just a short time. When we had our daughter in the Kalata school down there because of her handicap. And I learned a lot about the Woodlands, you know, while we lived down there for a short time. That no one knows the neighbors hardly know the names of the neighbors that live next door, and they couldn't have figured out why they didn't vote for the mayor in the city of Houston, because that's where they thought they were. You know?
They didn't know where that line was.
But they're now, after that length of time, it's now beginning though to come together. They're now political leaders, and the little girl that used to work for me, Nelda Blair. One of my little lawyers, you know, that's down there now, is the chairman of Sue's daughter, you know, and they're beginning to come together as a group and a cohesive community. They've got a long way to go to ever be like Conroe, but it is better down there. Yeah. But the biggest attribute for Montgomery County is still the city of Conroe and the families that live here and made it into what it is. And it's made up of people of all nationalities and economic levels, and it's just a awfully fine place to live. And I cannot thank my family enough for accepting the call to pastor that church over here and bringing me down here to live in this town.
Well, what's happened, what you and other leaders in the city and the county have done, is it's given an opportunity for people who graduate from school here to come back and work.
Right.
When I graduated,
Yeah.
there was no job. 1965.
Yeah. See,
I left.
None of my children live here.
That's right.
You
So
know,
now
there were no
Conroe
jobs
is
for them.
such,
That's right. Yeah.
and the Woodlands and
Yeah.
in the county,
Uh-huh.
that people indeed want to come back and live here.
And if we get our tech park going out here, like I think we will,
Yeah.
it was going to offer tremendous other opportunities for our young people, to stay here in this area too.
That's
and
right.
Maintain their
Because
family
the young
life.
people now
It's gonna keep
stay
them
here, and people like me have come back.
That's right. It's going to keep them off of the freeway, having to commute to Houston
That's
down
right.
there, and that enhances their family life, and it's just a plus
That's right.
for all of us.
Yeah,
Here
we
in our
had
community. That's right.
trees, we had good schools,
That's right.
and we had a community spirit
Yep.
that
And,
people in Houston wanted to come live here.
That's right. And
Yeah.
we're finding that out. We're one of the fastest growing counties in the entire United States.
That's right. That's right.
And I don't know what it's going to be like. We're at roughly 500,000 today, and they're saying by 2030 we may be 1,000,000.
That's right.
So we're going to double, what we are.
That's
And
right.
just when you kind of figure, just to provide the infrastructure and streets and schools and public buildings
That's
and
right.
all that to take care of court systems.
How about
take care
how about a new lake?
And clearly we need
Clearly
water.
a new
we
lake.
need
Yeah.
water
This
resources.
is we've learned from this
Yeah.
experience that
Yeah.
with the growth that we have, water is
Right.
going to be more precious than that oil field out there.
Well, I was good friends with Bill Clements, and I served as a regional chairman for him when he ran for governor for 14 counties. And he appointed me to several committees. I was also the co-vice chairman of the county government committee with John Lindsay, who was the county judge down
That's
in
right. Houston,
Harris County, and Mike Moncrief, who was a Democrat, by the way, but was the county judge in Tarrant County in Fort Worth, and recently was the mayor up there. And we served on that committee. I got to know John real well. I helped him with the Hardy Toll Road and meeting with some of the people down there to work that project, and got just a real good feel for what local government. I thought what local government needed to do in this area for roads and for water. And the governor then appointed me to the Water Commission for the state for a water study that was to be done. And one of the things that we looked at that time, which like a lot of studies, that it's a nicely printed book.
Yep.
It goes on the shelf, and that's what happened with this one. It never did anything. But to put another lake in up here north of Lake Conroe.
Right.
And that was one of the things we looked at back in those days.
Where's the book? Y'all need to dust it off. And
it's around somewhere. So I'm sure there may be one or two of them left someplace.
I think Judge Sadler probably knows where it is.
He
and
probably does.
probably looking at it now.
And he may be,
Yeah, that's true.
because it certainly needs to be done.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And
Because the growth is unavoidable.
So-
It's going to come.
and I did attend when I was the mayor. Also, the dam was dedicated out here, and we had the council for the city of Conroe, for the city of Houston came up. Louis Welch was the mayor in there,
that.
and all of the council members came up from Houston, and we looked out across that vast area, which had no water in it, just the old river bed, that was coming down through there. And a lot of the conversation that was said that day was, well, it'll probably take 3 or 4 years for this thing to fill up, and that'll give all these developers time to get their bulkheading in and
Right.
get some of these things done, and then that's fall. The rains came, and that lake filled up. In just a few months' time, it was full, There's still some old bulldozers down in the bottom of that lake. They never were able to get some of that equipment out down there, still underneath that water down there. But that lake changed overnight almost, and what a boon it has been, for us up here, And it's such a beautiful lake on top of that because of the sandy watershed that it drains, and it's just not muddy like Trinity and Toledo Bend and places like that. So it's been a big boon for it. But the truth of the matter is that the city of Houston owns 2/3 of that water, and it was built for a water supply, not a lake for real estate development, which is what it's become. But that's just the way it is. So,
my father tells the story that a local realtor by the name of Eddie Adcock took him out there one day, and he said, "Morris, right here, there's going to be water." And my father went, "Sorry, Eddie, $3,500, I'm not buying." Sure enough, there's water right there.
Eddie Adcock was was a Presbyterian, a member of our church. And the reason I liked Eddie, as a young man, I was a deacon in the church, and Eddie was chairman of the board of deacons. And Eddie ran the quickest meetings that anybody ever run. There was no comment. He went down and we got things done, and in 30 minutes we were finished. We were gone.
That was it.
And I said he was the greatest chairman of the deacons if I ever saw him.
I can remember his face well. I can remember his face.
He was a good guy. I liked Eddie.
Mickey, and listening to you talk and kind of a closing, you've talked about the accomplishments. We know the future of Conroe Montgomery County is you can't help but grow. For the generations to come, the people that'll watch this in 3, 5, 7 years, do you have a message for young people? What you've learned, what you've seen, that you like to leave in?
Well, one of the things that I've always wished, and I know Sam probably feels this way too, is I feel like we've lost so much in our high school, and I'd love to see the high school come back and be competitive, and the kids enjoy the situation out there. I think that with the coming of the tech park and the type of people I think that we will see come into this community will have a big impact on that. And because I think the school has a tremendous impact upon how a community relates to itself and to its children. And I think we have a wonderful Conroe Independent School system, but in recent times I've seen our high school not stay at the same level that some of the other high schools are staying. Here, that's one of the things I would like to see, and and being a minister's son and having been brought up as a Christian. And believing and loving in the Lord Jesus Christ as my Savior, I feel like we have really gotten away from a good religious upbringing, in our families. Our family life has suffered a lot, and so we should be always cognizant of the things that we can do as a community and as our local government to do the things that encourage good family life, and that's having good jobs, opportunity, not having to commute everywhere around the world to do that, but be able to be with your children and raise them right. Those are things I'd like to see take place for it. Whether they ever will or not, beyond me. I don't know. I won't live long enough to see it. But
your generation and others in this community have done more than your part to make sure that Montgomery County and Conroe continues to grow and be a place people want to come and live.
Sure, like I said, I'd like to say that I've left a good legacy for my children.
That's right.
I wish they lived here, but they don't. And I've always tried to encourage mine to be community-minded, and if they were able to serve in an opportunity, whatever it is, serve it.
Well,
do it. That's
Mickey,
right.
Believe me, maybe your children will come back sometime. I'm a living testament that kids come back to Conroe.
They will do. And I'll live in hopes.
That's right. Okay. Mr. Deison, it's been my pleasure.
Well, I thank you all for just doing something
like this. Thank you very much.
This is really
Again,
great.
my name is Butch Bateman. This has been a series of videotaped interviews to preserve the legacy, to preserve the memories of native people in Conroe, people who grew up here, people who have lived and worked here, of what Conroe used to be like. And we will continue this series for years to come. We thank you very much for your attendance, and good day.